Today we're making a high-quality herbal oil using the process of alcohol intermediary. First we take our dried herb. Here we're using Brittlebush flowers. We put the dried herb into a blender and grind it to powder form. Once it's powdered, pour it off into your mason jar. The next step is we want to weigh it. For every ounce of dried herb, we're going to add a ½ ounce of Everclear. Now this weight is by volume, so we have 6 ounces of herb, we're going to add 3 ounces of Everclear. We pour the Everclear over the dried herb, and then we take time to make sure that all of the dried herb has been wetted. You can use a knife like I'm showing you here and go around the jar to ensure that all of the dried herb has alcohol covering it. What this does is the alcohol opens the cellular surface of the plant, allowing for more medicinal absorption into the oil that's to come. Once we've coated all of our dried plant with the alcohol, we're going to let it sit on the counter. Could take up to 12 hours, sometimes longer. What we're looking to do now is simply let the alcohol evaporate off. I leave my jar open to the air once I've ensured that it's all wet with alcohol, and simply just set it on the counter and give it time for the alcohol to evaporate. Once the alcohol's evaporated, we can go ahead and cover the plant in oil. I use olive oil in this case. You can use any type of oil you want, but when using olive oil, always look for first cold pressed. Now we're literally filling the same jar with oil, using a knife to ensure that the oil is wetting all of the plant, just like we did with the alcohol. The difference is we're going to fill this jar all the way up with the oil, making sure there's no air pockets, making sure that we're completely covered in olive oil. The alcohol intermediary process just produces a much higher quality oil. It really allows us to extrapolate the medicinal qualities of the plant. Now I could simply have just taken this herb, covered it in oil, not powdered it, not used alcohol to open up the cellular structure, but just simply covered Brittlebush flowers dried with oil. I could let them sit in a sunny place and let the sun do the work that the blender's going to do for us here. But I found that even on the best days, in the highest sun, with the best quality plants, the alcohol intermediary process really produces a greater color, a greater medicinal value to our finished oils. So now we're almost finished with filling this jar. The oil has saturated the plant. The jar's full right here, topping it off. And then we're simply going to transfer all the contents of this jar into the blender jar. And that's where it's going to stay for the next 2 days, because we're going to be blending this repeatedly for the next 48 hours. You can do it longer, just don't do it shorter. Give yourself 48 hours, 2 days, and every time you come into the kitchen, turn your blender on and let the blender run until the jar is warm under your hand. This tells us that the oil within is heating up, and that heat is what creates the transfer of the medicine into the oil. The more oil we use here, the more finished product we will get. Now we're transferring the contents into the blender jar. Whatever you do, you want to try not to contaminate the contents. So, don't touch them with your fingers. Make sure at all costs there's no water anywhere near the mix, because that will ruin your finished product. Now we have a blender jar full of our oiled herb. We're going to put the top on and we're going to start blending. You can start on low to get your grinder going. Make sure it's going to move in there without congesting the blades. But once it starts to grind, you can go ahead and set it to high. And typically, you will blend this each time. It's a good 5 minutes, I would say, until that jar heats up under your hand. And you'll feel it under the hand. You don't have to reach into the oil mix. Just simply put your hand on the outside of the jar. And when it's good and warm, turn the blender off. And you're going to do this repeatedly for the next couple days. It's really annoying to the family because they're listening to the blender run, but they certainly do enjoy it when you're using the oil or the salve for their well-being. As you blend it repeatedly, you'll start to notice the oil separating from the herb. Here you'll see it getting thicker and thicker as a wide red band. Every time you come back to your blender, it will have separated a little more, and you'll have rich, deep color. And believe it or not, even though it appears to be a dark red, this oil will be golden when you pour it off. So we're blending some more. You can see each time we do it, it's separating further and further and further from the dried herb that's residing in the bottom of the jar. Don't rush the process, it's worth it. All right, now we're going to pour off, and this is what I like to use. I like to use a cloth bag. We really don't want anything that's porous, so you want to find yourself a good cloth bag, and they're not easy to find. I use a bungee. I use a mason jar. It's a very simple process. But that tight weave in this cloth bag ensures that none of the dried herb is going to slip through into my finished product. So now I'm just filling the bag. It's a little each time because it takes a little while to fit all of the blended oil into the strainer bag. And it's probably a process that takes a few hours. just letting it strain the finished product into a clean mason jar. And as that level decreases, you can put a little more oil on top. And you just have to be patient here because there is no squeezing, there's no pushing of the oil into the jar. We really want it to go at its own rate and just drip into the jar. And eventually it will be just dripping. Drip, drip, drip. And it can drip for several hours, but the difference can be a half cup, a cup of finished product. Just depends. Now, everything's dripped out here, and I'm removing the menstruum from the finished product. And you want to be very careful here, pulling your bag out. You don't want to squeeze it because you can create kind of like a dirty oil. If you squeeze that, I know you're going to want to squeeze it, but don't squeeze it. Remove it and discard it. And what's in the jar is your finished product. And the color at the top there is the color of the oil. Now you always want to label your finished product. Make sure it says Brittlebush flower in olive oil with a date. I use a Sharpie marker because if you use a pen and you get oil on that label, it can become illegible. So you want to be able to read it, you know, even if it's a year from now. But there's your finished product. That's what that made. Looks like 2 cups. Maybe less, maybe a cup. But see that color? That's the Brittlebush flower, and that's the potent medicine. And now you've upped your game. Store this in a cool, dark place. Now you've upped your game.